Nothing is more important than television, and no one more important than the people who make that television. J.D. Salinger said that. Don't look it up. Art allows us to move mountains. It makes our wildest dreams come true. The support of artists has helped us win major gains. Marriage equality, raising millions of dollars for charities. I could go on. I see these kids being raised by iPads these days, and I honestly get jealous of them, because what better way is there to get in touch with the world and to change the world? So thank you, artists, for bringing us into the future, for helping us create a better... I just remembered about Occupy Wall Street. Thank you, artists. The Iraq War, gun violence, trans rights, climate change. We're gonna have to rethink this whole thing. Can we take this down, please?
During the Vietnam War, which lasted longer than any war we've ever been in and which we lost, every respectable artist in this country was against the war. It was like a laser beam. We were all aimed in the same direction. The power of this weapon turns out to be that of a custard pie dropped from a stepladder 6 feet high.
Growing up on the internet, I felt compelled many times to join the conversation. I was taught this is how change was made. People speak up, they educate each other, the consensus shifts and society moves on. I was a very online child with fairly online preoccupations, microaggressions, good representation. If we're being honest, mostly Minecraft. And my priorities came to me through videos on the internet. These little nuggets of self-expression made aesthetically pleasing and packaged to win people over. This is just what you did, I thought, when you cared about something. You got the word out. So starting about a decade ago, I decided to give it a shot. I put myself out there, out here, in service of the issues I felt strongly about. I made videos about homelessness, feminism, and the teenage misery I was going through, all to a tiny audience, but I didn't care. Here, where speaking out meant creating a piece of content, and a carefully considered piece of content entered the realm of art, making art felt as natural as drawing breath. I took a few years off to focus on becoming an adult, but honestly, I was never going to keep away. In 2021, I start making these videos about trans community stuff in hopes of helping some people out. The very first one blows up beyond my wildest dreams, and I guess I'll make it my job? I mean, it was better than making salads for tech bros. Jesus, anything would be. In the past few years, I've had my hands full, as have lots of my colleagues, making art that advocates for trans people. Some of it has entered the zeitgeist and become fully mainstream. Right now, we're living through a boom of trans cinema, trans literature, trans comics. Yet you'll notice things haven't been going awesome for trans people. There's a whole lot of, they keep throwing around the word eradicate. You've seen it. Every time I pour months of my life into a video and then watch things get worse even faster, I can't help but wonder if this is the best place to focus my energy. How valuable is it really to pick apart how and why people have a problem with us? And for money, no less, I'm using other people's time and resources, not just my own. Art changes what people pay attention to, and it can influence where they focus their energy. I grew up surrounded by art that told me to speak up and change people's minds, so I did. And to be fair, art is really good at changing conversations, to the point that some people point to that as the purpose of art. The way gay fictional characters have been credited for making audiences more open-minded, or how those very special episodes of sitcoms often became huge cultural moments. An example I love is, you know how urban planning is having a moment the last few years? Like good transit, walkable cities, bunch of 20-year-olds using the word zoning, you don't really know what it means. That's art, baby. That's memes and YouTube videos teaching the public how things can be better. The vibrant culture around trans people's art, I saw what that could do for people because I saw what it did for me. In my formative years, it gave me a direction to focus my energy. It made me believe in the power of making myself heard, even or especially if what I was saying isn't what people wanted to hear. Raising awareness for my position felt like a brave thing to do. And I'm wondering if we leaned into it a little too hard. If you've used social media, like ever, you understand that awareness is not always a good thing. Not when everything is vying for your attention at all times. Nowadays, we have access to more information than at any other point in history, and the result feels complicated. There is a point where all the world's affairs blend together and become meaningless, and all that my awareness amounts to is a pit in my stomach. When I wake up in the morning, a lot of the time I immediately grab my phone and open Twitter. God, that's embarrassing to say out loud. And when I do that, I bear witness to hundreds of moments of tragedy and injustice I have no context for, alongside thousands or tens of thousands of opinions on them I don't feel qualified to evaluate. The problems in the world start to feel far too big to understand, let alone confront. And I carry a little bit of that despair around with me all day. We call this experience doom scrolling, and it's the result of too much undirected awareness. While doom scrolling doesn't help anything, it's understandable that we keep doing it because this is how we're taught to learn. Most schools approach teaching by filling us up with as much information as possible and grading us on our ability to retain it. In his book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Paolo Freire called this model banking education, and he believed its purpose was to make citizens feel powerless. Freire argued that teaching by having lists of facts drilled into us essentially instills in us that we're passive witnesses of history, unable to think for ourselves or understand what needs doing. In the same vein, some people approach advocacy by bombarding us with as much information as possible, with the hope that getting across the scale of a problem will fill us with the urgency needed to fix it. I don't think it does. Now, the banking model is meant to describe actual teachers and actual classrooms, and obviously a big web of citizens spreading information is different in some key ways. But in the same way that a school curriculum is guided by a government with ideological goals, everything that takes place publicly online is mediated by tech companies with, more often than not, quite similar goals. If they can make us feel a responsibility to spread the word about various social issues, we'll feel like we have to spend time on their platforms to be engaged citizens. If that time then makes us feel powerless, what is there to do but post through it? An approach built around shifting consensus limits us in what we can actually change. Because in so many political battles, public opinion is not the bottleneck. The bottleneck is the interests of the powerful. So many of our contentious societal issues are not actually that controversial. Generally, people want good healthcare. They want to be able to buy a house. They want to deal with climate change. But our will isn't always enough. It's not that public opinion is totally irrelevant. That's why you try to keep on good terms with the media. But when a lot of money is on the line, you're not always making decisions based on what's popular. You're making decisions that will benefit you, and then doing your best to get the public on board. To its credit, art can change what the public is on board with. We see it all the time. It is much harder to change what the people in power will benefit from. There are certain political issues where not that much is on the line for the powerful, where progressive wins wouldn't pose an existential threat. And in those cases, advocacy through art is a pretty direct path to success, opening people's minds, shaping the consensus. I've seen it work. But for like bike lanes. But the most pressing issues we're facing today come down to irreconcilable differences between the interests of the people and the interests of the state. Trying to resolve those through awareness campaigns succeeds only in making us understand how little power we currently have. You're probably already thinking about Palestine here, right? Grassroots efforts to end the ongoing genocide are hugely popular worldwide, and they have the support of too many artists to count. But those of us in countries aligned with Israel have found our governments, universities, and large corporations incredibly hostile to our position. Israel is their trading partner and a powerful regional ally. Their refusal to leverage their power to end this brutality is a coldly calculated one. They don't think it would benefit them. And the way to change that is not by appealing to their conscience, but by making their position risky and unprofitable, with things like rail blockades, university encampments, pressure campaigns, boycotting stores, changing banks, and making sure elected officials don't know a day of peace until this ends. I am really glad the activists are spending their energy where it'll count. I think we need to understand that focusing too much on shifting public opinion necessarily limits what we can change, because oppression isn't a product of prejudiced discourse. When we mistake the media for culture, and we mistake culture for society at large, It's easy to think we live in a world that really values self-expression through art. Such a wide variety of art is allowed, even distributed widely. Really, we live in a world that's figured out how to benefit from all expression without having to factor that expression into its decision-making. Self-expression that demands to be taken into account is often likened to physical violence anyway and met with brutal crackdowns. Capital can benefit from any self-expression it can stick ads on, including this right now. Google, along with Amazon, is party to a $1.2 billion contract with the Israeli government and military, and they're gonna make a couple $1,000s off this pro-Palestine video. They're playing both sides, so they always come out on top. We live in a world that manipulates basically all media to carry water for the rich and powerful, to turn every last artwork into an interchangeable piece of... She's on the content rant. Look out, folks. Maybe it'll even do something this time. Yeah, nothing is sacred. We live in an economy. Anything we make, no matter how subversive, carries with it an ideology that we probably don't mean to be spreading. It makes social media the place to be, one that offers an infinite combination of positions with which to identify, one which validates our choice to spend our energy here, which offers us political satisfaction by way of feeling filled up with knowledge. Unless a post is actively pushing us to take action offline, it contributes to the spectacle. The notion that these massive vital issues are resolved by public consultation and not by looking at actuarial tables. Some people take from this that battles in the cultural sphere are purely a distraction, that any art that manages to spread widely is morally compromised, and that the whole notion of change through art should be abandoned altogether. There's something to be said about art that pushes us deeper into the weeds and gives us bullshit priorities. Even if artists can't save the world, I'm comfortable saying Nancy Pelosi on Drag Race is hurting the effort.
I am American, American, American. I am American, American. Red, white, and blue.
With that aside, I think leaving art behind would be a mistake. First off, the fact that political movements supported by artists often fail can't possibly be an indictment of art. In a given political struggle, there are just so many other factors at play. An anti-war movement or a human rights movement could do a great job of using art to advance their cause, and then fail for totally unrelated reasons. Over the course of history, the creation of great political art hasn't really correlated to material gains that strongly, and yet activists have found time for it anyway. I mean, name a political movement and they have used art to further their cause. Conscious rappers, Gazan poets, and labor movements the world over have all found a place for art, in circumstances far more dire than Google makes money when I talk. The media landscape we're in can make it feel like nothing we do matters, but ultimately, it's the hand we've been dealt, and we need to adapt as best we can. Lord knows our enemies will. So we understand that too much awareness can be disorienting and make it hard to address the issues that really matter. But I'm gonna come in here with a hot take. Education is still good. There's a reason so many successful movements have focused on literacy, on schooling. And that's that knowledge can be power if we use it right. This idea forms the foundation of Freire's own theory of education, which lends his book its name, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Freire starts from the understanding that oppression dehumanizes us. It allows the world to have its way with us and ignore our basic needs. Worse, it convinces us to get on board with our own oppression by making us see the world not from our own point of view, but from the oppressors, rationalizing the injustice we face, making it feel deserved or inevitable. An oppressive society might acknowledge that the oppressed have a tough time, but it'll do so with language that obscures where that difficulty comes from. We describe neighborhoods as disadvantaged, when really what we mean is they're intentionally deprived of basic amenities like food and housing. We describe countries as poor, even when they're incredibly rich in natural resources, and a better word would be pillaged. In describing the world as static, this kind of education glosses over why things are however they are, and discourages critical thinking in hopes that people will passively receive whatever world is handed to them. One of the goals of Freire's teaching method is to get people to break free of the oppressor's logic and start thinking from their own point of view. What themes are relevant to their lives? How have all the swirling forces of the world come together to create their specific situation? Here, the classroom is only the beginning. Freire says that instead of handing knowledge down from above, we should trust people to produce knowledge about their experiences. He says this process makes us feel more fully human and empowers us to actively participate in the world. Art is so good at this, it's not even funny. A unique point of view is like one of the most exciting things art can have. It's what separates forgettable schlock from classics. An artwork has so many tools at its disposal to spark curiosity and empathy. In stories, talking about how past struggles got people where they are now isn't dry like history homework, it's lore. It's like video game lore. People go crazy over it. Ironically, because art isn't considered a serious threat to the system, you'll find a wider offering of worldviews there than almost anywhere else. I think it's probably the single easiest place to speak from and for a marginalized point of view, to explore themes and develop language that gels with your experience. Art can go against the grain and present an alternate record of a certain place and time by exploring like the psyche of its citizens, what felt important to them, what was changing around them, what scared them. Revealing your world and all the factors shaping it can be a gift to the public well into the future. I've learned a lot from like queer zines and old Soviet movies that I didn't learn from reading history about those same people and times. Just internalizing that they were human too, with weaknesses and anxieties, makes me feel better. It makes me feel like liberation belongs to all of us. Art may not by itself emancipate anyone, but understanding where we came from is vital to building anything better. Without the past, we have no idea what we're capable of. I'm going to bring this back around to video essays for a second because it's kind of the only thing I'm anything close to an authority on. Video essays have existed for decades, but they really kicked into overdrive with the YouTube algorithm. For most of their history, they were an academic medium used in film studies for obvious reasons. You know, if you're talking about an interesting camera movement, better to show it than describe it. Video has more tools to create meaning than text alone does. You can use not only visuals, but vocal intonation, music, even things like the timing of cuts. The first people I remember taking advantage of these qualities were Toni Joe and Taylor Ramos, creators of the channel Every Frame a Painting. Maybe you remember, they made these world-class video essays about the choices made by filmmakers to make the work cohesive and impactful. To me, these were a revelation when they came out, just so much more considered and crafted than anything else I was watching. There's a kind of fun meta thing to it. Their videos were great because they used film form to effectively explain film form. Just like this video is about what motivated the choices that went into making this video. Moral of the story, artists love talking about themselves. Anyway, the people who followed in Joe and Ramos's footsteps found some ways to help videos stand out in the attention economy, where they're typically surrounded by much louder, flashier voices. Unsurprisingly, visual style goes a long way. A lot of video essays look drop-dead gorgeous nowadays, and others are enhanced just as much by being authentically lo-fi, shot on bedroom floors or whatever. But the innovation most relevant to us today is the title. Unsurprisingly, creators don't always feel like talking about the trending topic of the week or the biggest movie in theaters, right? Sometimes you just don't have that much to say. So people start coming up with ways to get you to click on something they think is interesting, even when you don't have much interest in the topic yet. Video essays pivot basically from being like balanced overviews of a topic to, in my opinion, a more intriguing format. Journeys that take you from the familiar into the completely new. I'm not talking clickbait, it's more of a playful bait and switch. The latest ContraPoints video as of filming is titled Twilight, and I mean, it's not about Twilight, but the meat of it is about how different ideologies understand the relationship between sexuality and consumption. She explores how the Christians and the feminists and the psychoanalysts butt heads, but ultimately have a fair bit in common on this. If you click on the action button review of the vacation simulator Boku no Natsuyasumi, you might not expect to end up in a sunflower field learning what nostalgia feels like for a man who remembers everything that's ever happened to him. In both cases, they get you there. And neither video feels contrived at all. It feels like Tim and Natalie dug until they hit groundwater, and now they're showing you the currents they've found. Video essays reject the idea that anything is not that deep. The format allows you to draw interesting links from the well-known into the misunderstood, from the mainstream into the repressed, in order to give people something they didn't know they needed. If you're trying to reach people on YouTube, packaging is the most important thing by orders of magnitude. It's a little depressing, but it kind of works out. It makes YouTube a pretty good place to express perspectives that people aren't naturally open to or curious about. You can get away with kind of a lot on here if you nail the framing. For a while now, this has been like my cheat code to getting views while making whatever. Like, I know people will click on my videos about trans stuff, so I try to use that as a jumping off point to explore whatever esoteric ideas I'm actually thinking about. I'm kind of baffled how well it works, actually. My video, Why Are People Trans, spends only a few minutes talking about the studies that address that question before getting into what I think are much more useful questions under the question. Is it okay to lie to yourself? How do we rationalize our pain? Are there answers science shouldn't pursue? It's got medieval rabbis and psychosis and shit, and 500,000 views. It was a pretty uncompromised vision of what I wanted to say to my community, considered from our standpoint, talking about what serves us instead of trying to satisfy the curiosities of the general public. If I'd written it as a book, I don't think anyone would have published it. But on YouTube, they didn't need to. Ironically, my videos only spread far because platforms spread any message that brings in money. On YouTube, connections and grand theories happen to play well. This actually cuts two ways, advances two competing theories of interconnectedness. On the one hand, conspiracy. On the other, one we can really use right now, solidarity. I love how YouTube has people thinking in systems more. I love how video essays can show us that no gap between two things is unbridgeable, that recurrent themes and motives explain many events, that we can find little bits of ourselves all over the world. I think this might be the key to expressing a point of view without just becoming another voice in the crowd. You have to put in the time, understand the full story, and make it make sense. Notice patterns and explain what creates them. Ease people into new territory by drawing connections to things they already know. Point out those unexpected places power rears its head, not just to get across the scale of the systems we're up against, but to help people understand their many weak points. For example, did you know Canada's pension system has over $1 billion invested in companies that advance the Palestinian genocide? Because I didn't. I found that out last night at 1 a.m. while writing this, and now I want to tell everyone I know. Because, that's something that could maybe change. Like always, the Palestinian movement is an example we can all stand to learn from. When word spreads about a new atrocity committed by the Israeli military, notice how not a moment of awareness is wasted. Palestinians and their supporters will always jump in to offer the necessary context for why Israel is doing what it's doing, and always have a lucid course of action informed by their strong knowledge of history and resistance movements. We're staging sit-ins to get companies to divest from Israel because that's what anti-apartheid activists did in South Africa, and that worked. Because there's such a strong grasp on history and an eagerness to understand the extent of the problem, there are few, if any, shots in the dark. The explosion in support for their cause over the last months shows us that public awareness campaigns can be effective as long as they make it make sense. On any given day, my own inner world verges on incomprehensible. I think I have access to way too much raw information I don't know how to interpret. So when I can, it feels good to weave all these different threads into a pattern, something a little easier to fit in your head. I think that's why I gravitate toward pretty research-heavy projects. I don't think I'm uniquely smart or gifted, but what I do have that most people don't is time. I could afford to spend 2 or 3 months dissecting a topic and making something elegant out of it because Nebula and Patreon mostly. In such busy, splintered times, I notice people really appreciate it when an artist takes their time building a clear statement. Lately, I'm thinking a lot about the artist Tabitha Arnold, who makes these huge tapestries to honor workers' unions. She weaves each one by hand over dozens or hundreds of hours of work, and that work makes a connection all by itself. There are loads more ways to make it make sense than literally saying, oh boy, these two things sure are connected, although that is the route I have clearly taken. You can also build cohesion through form, using motifs to consider the same thing from different viewpoints. Use color theory, alliteration, and rhyming to draw implicit ties between words or objects. Compose an image in a way that really drives home the experience or dynamic you're trying to get at. With all due respect to my man Kurt Vonnegut, he was wrong. It's true that the Vietnam War went on despite opposition from artists and the broader public, but artists actually did have a role to play in its eventual end. Specifically photographers. Journalists on the ground in Vietnam routinely mailed over photos that painted a horrifying picture of the war. civilians being massacred, children set on fire by napalm. The artful composition of these photos made them more impactful because it helped them get across the human experience of the war and got them picked up by national magazines and newspapers. Photojournalism was a huge funnel into the anti-war movement, which did eventually succeed. The Vietnam War still dragged on far too long. But if we're upset about that, our beef isn't really with artists, it's with the state. Okay, but what about art? I've mostly been talking about how information can change the world, and we all know information can change the world. Art's primary goal isn't usually to educate or change things directly. People who want to do that will usually go out and do something concrete, not make a painting about it. The social impact of art is hard to measure and not really the point, because nothing is the point. Most people make art because they have this weird urge inside them that they may not even understand. When I'm writing and I start doodling in the margins of my notebook, I'm not trying to accomplish anything, right? I just like doing it. Art is made special by its aesthetic value, and that value doesn't need to be in service of some external goal. By the way, this is my buddy Miles. Want to come say hi?
Hi.
He's going to be tattooing me today.
Really?
Yep. Using artfulness as a means to spark change is how we get wheat paste posters and protest chants and those really sweet, kind of gay propaganda paintings. There's no denying these can be great, but no one wants to live in a world where they're all that exists. What we get out of our favorite paintings, songs, or movies is entirely different. An approach that treats aesthetics as a means to an end will probably end up producing pretty stale, joyless art. As much as I support the ideology of socialist realism, the actual paintings typically leave me cold. And these self-righteous, rich people bad movies we're seeing lately almost make me embarrassed to agree with them. I want them to be worth experiencing, not just morally good. I'm thinking about how art sits with me in practice. Do I want more cartoons that'll convince 30-year-olds trans people are valid? Or do I want house music I can dance to? Do I want permission to live? Or do I just want to live? People aren't machines who spend every second of their lives either intaking information or acting on it. And art shouldn't be the result of such a dry process either. As important as it is to analyze the world, we spend much more time experiencing the world. We cook each other dinner, we find it in ourselves to get out of bed in the morning. And that stuff isn't frivolous or a distraction. It's what everything else is in service of. The freedom to just be human. Most art finds its place in our everyday lives. It entertains us or distracts us or keeps us company. Its ability to do that isn't necessarily tied to actionable content. When you bob your head to the driving beat of a song or cry at the end of a movie, you already know why it should exist. You don't have to reason it out. There's a real concern that the media we consume serves mostly to pacify us, that the constant simulation actually has more of a sedative effect, leaving us disconnected but too comfortable to care. That's not entirely wrong, but it's not inevitable either, because art has this enormous power to put us in touch with our humanity. Maybe we just need to use it right. I'm interested in how, even without being strictly educational, art can further the pedagogy of the oppressed by getting people to understand their situation and take ownership over their humanity. I really sincerely believe art can push us towards a better world without losing its ability to nurture in the here and now. I haven't always been sure about that. Honestly, I've spent most of my time with this job scrambling to figure out whether it does more harm than good. Though, to be honest, I don't even know what else I would do with myself. I owe this new self-assuredness I found to one Toni Cade Bambara, who I've talked about before on this channel, but I'm not done. She was so cool. Bambara was an author and filmmaker who was inspired by New York City's Black arts movement in the 60s and 70s. She was an internationalist, a socialist, and a feminist, who's best remembered these days for an interview where she spoke with absolute clarity about what art does. She said, "The task of the artist is determined always by the status and process of the agenda of the community that it already serves. If you're an artist who identifies with, who springs from, who's serviced by or drafted by a bourgeois capitalist class, then that's the kind of writing you do. Then your job is to maintain status quo, to celebrate exploitation, or to guise it in some lovely romantic way. That's your job. If you're a writer in Cuba, post-revolutionary Cuba, your job is to celebrate the triumph of the national will. If you're a writer coming out of Kenya, the post-independent era in Kenya, your job is really to critique the failure of class struggle in Kenya and to tell the truth and try to share a vision of what society should be like if they're really going to liberate themselves. And now here's the bit that most people remember. As a cultural worker who belongs to an oppressed people, my job is to make revolution irresistible. One of the ways I attempt to do that is by celebrating those victories within the Black community. Also, my job is to critique the reactionary behavior within the community and to keep certain kinds of calls out there. Our responsibility of the children, our responsibility to maintain some kind of continuity from the past. I love this interview and I found it really instructive, but after it convinced me to pick up her first book, a book of short stories, I was surprised by what I found. The stories in there aren't written in the stoic political tone I expected. They rarely force a single takeaway on the reader, nor do they generally foreground oppression. The characters are oppressed, they're mostly poor Black Americans in the 60s, but to focus too much on the structure of oppression would be to neglect the very humanity that renders that structure unjust. Bambara's stories rarely feature simple victims, inert recipients of violence. Her characters go on outings, they have opinions, they fall in love and shape each other. What really strikes me about Bambara's stories isn't their ideological clarity, though they certainly have that, is that they're a blast to read. The titular story, Gorilla My Love, is told in a breakneck stream of consciousness that had me laughing out loud a few sentences in. It's narrated by a young girl named Hazel, who's razor sharp and needs you to know it. She doesn't spare a single detail in telling you her story about this drive she took with her family. To offer the necessary context, she goes off on one tangent about a movie theater, and then another about religion, and then another. You can practically hear the lack of breaths in between her sentences, and it's not clear where all this is going. By the time Hazel brings it back around to the family drive, I'd almost forgotten that's where we started, but then she gets to her point. Her uncle sat in the front seat and broke a promise he'd made to her years before. When she called him on it, he and her grandfather laughed it off like it was nothing. At this point, I realized, oh man, Hazel talks like this because no one takes her seriously. She went on these tangents to give us some examples of times she'd been taught how much it matters to be true to your word. The adults in her life thought they could teach her the rules and then break them, like she'd be too dumb to spot it. This got me thinking, oof, I could probably be better to the kids in my life, couldn't I? The insights in Bambara's writing don't come from her towering over you and telling you what opinions are correct. Her model comes much closer to Freire's. She gives a lot of thought and attention to how her community works and what they need. As a result, immersing yourself in her worlds is every bit as enlightening as she intended, because they're worlds that allow oppressed people to be fully human. This particular story takes the side of a young Black girl without asterisks or apologies. It tells us, this is the truth, then asks us what we're going to do about it. Some people with politics pretty similar to mine seem to believe that any work that focuses on human internal experience is idealist and misunderstands how change happens. You know, we won't save the world by winning hearts and minds. And yeah, sure, but we do at the very least all have hearts and minds, right? I don't think insisting we're all human could ever be a waste of time. When Bambara said her job was to make revolution irresistible, she meant it. That interview is often misquoted or taken out of context to make it seem like she's saying the role of artists, period, is to make revolution irresistible, implicitly some vague aesthetic upheaval. But no, Bambara was a Black revolutionary aligned with Cuba and Vietnam and the Pan-Africanists, speaking to Black Americans at the height of the Black Power movement. By revolution, she meant revolution. And she decided making it irresistible was her job by understanding what changes would serve her public and considering how her art could best support those efforts. The lesson to take here is not that every artist's role is to make revolution irresistible, but that every artist should ask themselves, what community do I stand with? And what's standing in the way of what they need? Doing that introspection myself has been a bummer, I can't lie. My community is not in a good way as of late. The political environment is really grinding us down. Voices from every direction insist that our experiences are not real, our bodies are not legitimate, basically that we just aren't human in the way other people are human. Living in this kind of cultural climate can totally sap a person's strength and have them accept their fate as victims. I think we can benefit right now from art that busts us out of that tells us, Hey, you are human, whether you like it or not. Your choices matter and you have to take ownership of them. A lot of important trans art does this. It sure as hell doesn't liberate us, but the willpower it cultivates just might. If I can be a voice in people's ear, keeping them invested in the struggle as they do the dishes or whatever, yeah, that's a contribution I can get behind. Escapism gets a bad rap, but what we're escaping matters. A successful work of art has us escape not from the truth, but from the forces in our lives that obscure the truth. Art can refuel us and reaffirm our values. It can make us recommit to the good fight by presenting a vision of a world worth fighting for. And ultimately, I think that's what I want to do. I want to offer a beat you can move to, if not at protests, maybe between them. I have a podcast for you to check out. It's called Nevergreen, and it happens to be made by one of my best friends, but that's not why I'm recommending it. The show features Lola Sebastian, aforementioned friend, revisiting a scandal that shook her hometown, where several teachers engaged in sexually inappropriate relationships with students, including some of Lola's classmates. Although many people caught glimpses of these relationships as they were ongoing, and some went on to see their old teachers go to prison over them, the school board's repeated failure to take accountability and protect students has made it difficult for the town to move past what happened. Now, true crime shows like this can often feel voyeuristic and be entertaining at the expense of their subjects, but Nevergreen promises an alternative to that. Lola conceived the show from the start as a way to help her community reckon with the awful things that happened and hopefully make it easier to heal from them. I'm blown away by the amount of care that went into this thing. Believe it or not, the show actually made me cry before getting into the heavy stuff, just from hearing how Lola describes her hometown. I'm an easy cry, but still. The first episode of Nevergreen is out now. It is a brilliant piece of citizen journalism, and I'm eagerly awaiting the rest. Like this video, Nevergreen was made possible by Nebula, who developed the show with Lola, produced it, and are releasing it as a Nebula original. Nebula started off as a way for creators to share our videos without ads and on a platform we actually have a say in. But recently we've been focusing our efforts on making original programming that doesn't and couldn't exist anywhere else. At this point, you've heard me talk about tons of them before. We've got original series, documentaries, podcasts, at least one play, and we just launched a movie studio. Big moves. I think Nebula represents a healthier model for the industry. We all have a stake in the company. We haven't taken any money from venture capitalists. We're trying to build something sustainable here, something that'll help more shows like Nevergreen get made. Because Nevergreen is important journalism and all, it's free to listen anywhere. But on Nebula, every episode comes out early and without any ads. If you want to check out our quickly expanding library of originals, alongside ad-free videos from me, Lola, FD Signifier, Big Joel, and so on, you can sign up for Nebula with my link. go.nebula.tv/LilyAlexander. That'll get you a 40% discount on our annual plan, which works out to $30 a year, $250 a month. If you really want to support what we're doing, right now we're offering lifetime memberships as a way to fund more of these big, ambitious projects. Lifetime memberships last forever, as long as you and Nebula are alive. You pay one time, then you'll get access to everything we'll ever publish. Head on over, go.nebula.tv/LilyAlexander. Help us make more good stuff. Thank you. If it wasn't obvious, I had a lot of help on this video. We shot the first part at the Community Digital Arts Hub in downtown Montreal, which was a great experience. Thanks especially to Becca Reedon for helping us set up. The artists working in the background for that part were a couple friends of mine, Mara and Miles, who turned out this lovely mural in an hour, and they made the shoot so much fun. In part 2, we had some pottery going thanks to my partner Vic. We filmed that at their family's house, so seriously thank you to Darla, Graham, and Dan for letting us take over your living room for the day. Also, not to brag or anything, but Vic's really good at pottery. You should follow them on Instagram. Look at that. Look at that. That's crazy. It's enormous. That's a really bad idea. Then the tattoo was, again, by Miles at Tattoo Art Connection. As of now, my tattoo isn't fully healed, so I'm not sure if I'm gonna show it off on screen, but if not, here's some of his other work. Book him. Huge thanks to Talah, my script editor, for helping me get a handle on all these ideas. It was weirdly hard. I couldn't have done it without him. And last but not least, thank you to Jacob Geller for voicing that Kurt Vonnegut quote. I am so lucky to be surrounded by all these talented, creative people. I'm gonna roll Patreon credits now and play you a recording from this great show I just went to. This is Willie Carlisle singing The Great Depression. His music is just really getting me through the days lately, See you soon.
There is trouble in the darkening sky, he saw it as a boy. From great-granddad's covered wagon, from the crux of Illinois. For the promise of the daffodils amongst the hard limestone, they carved the die of fortune out of Buffalo home. They all wandered o'er the salty seas, the prairies wide and more, just to make a foolish man like me this darken in your door. If the Great Depression made us, there's no need to despair. I won't waste a single moment of the work that brought me here. From the jailhouse on the border, to the hold beneath the ship, to the wheat fields out in Oregon, to the first night that we kissed. From the darkness of the coal mine to the brightest factory floor, to win our kin a better life is still worth dying for. And I still cry my eyes out every time I dare to touch the spirit. And if this is our small lot in life, I'm gonna love it like I mean it. If the Great Depression made us, there's no need to despair. I won't waste a single moment of the work that brought me here. Oh, the blood is strong with victory that brought us our despair. I won't waste a single moment of the love that